Welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce Singapore's podcast channel. We're excited to bring you season 3 of new episodes featuring in-depth content across Singapore, ASEAN and the United Kingdom. We've had some extraordinary guests on our channel, including Formula One's Claire Williams.
I'm a firm believer that any great team, any successful team has a great culture flowing through it. You aren't successful if you don't. So we put a lot of work into this.
Renowned mountaineer Kenton Cool.
There, 2019, there with a client, a big storm came in and literally destroyed Camp 2. And I got some video footage of Sherpas like trying to hold on to the tent fabric as it blows away. And
the Royal Navy's Commodore Steve Morehouse, commander of the UK Carrier Strike Group.
The squadron of F-35 aircraft we have on board is a Royal Air Force squadron, and the personnel there are drawn from both the Navy and the Air Force. So, what better way of showing just the efficiency and the joined-up nature that we now have.
And distinguished Sky News anchor Jeremy Thompson.
We had 2 little vans with satellite links, and we leapfrogged up the road to Pristina, the capital, throughout that first day, with non-stop coverage from basically inside a war zone.
We also sit down with the likes of TikTok, Twitch and Twitter and continue to bring you conversations around business and trade, leadership and people, sustainability, sports and arts and much, much more. Thank you, as always, for your support and we hope you enjoy this podcast.
Hello, my name is Giles Henman and I'm the Senior Partner and Head of Business for 8 Wealth International. And today we're talking to Kelly Gregg, all things tax. Kelly is Head of Tax for 8 Tax and Legacy Experts. Welcome, Kelly.
Hello, Giles. Welcome.
So let's start with a very open question. How did a girl from Cornwall end up in Singapore?
So it's a really good question. I was born and bred in Cornwall, but then moved to the bright lights of London, where I spent probably about 15 years of my career practicing both as a solicitor and also a chartered tax advisor. So I'm dual qualified. And I had been working with 8 Wealth for probably about the last 8 to 9 years. They decided to branch out to Asia. They obviously saw a gap in the market. And then you gave me a call and said, how about moving to Singapore? So I think I said, well, why not?
Absolutely. Now, the world is becoming increasingly complex. Big governments are looking at more and more ways to increase the tax burden on individuals. What do you see as the biggest risk to British expats, for example? And what support are you able to offer them?
I think one of the risks is the lack of knowledge to the British expats ordinarily possess in terms of their tax affairs, and then the knowledge about who they should actually be instructing. So there are lots of different qualifications, there's lots of different levels of expertise, and it's knowing who to go to and what they can actually provide. The tax code in the UK is the most complicated tax code in the entire world. We have to look at lots and lots of books, more than any other tax lawyer. And so it's really important that you get good advice and you don't just think that because you're outside of the UK, the HMRC won't catch up with you, because they most definitely will.
Okay, that's interesting. So you arrived back in March. We only formally launched the business at the end of June, but from what you've seen so far, are you surprised by how people have been supported or are supported? Is there huge gaps in the market when it comes to advice?
I think we already knew that there was a gap in the market, and that was part of the opportunity, and actually the part of the reason that I thought it would be great to come here. There isn't a huge amount of advice in this space being serviced from Asia. So you'll find clients are going to the UK or communicating with UK lawyers, UK tax advisors to get the advice. Not many advisors on the ground. And then the advisors that I have come across are only partially doing a job. So they may, for example, complete the tax return for you and submit it to HMRC, but then what they're not doing is telling you that actually if you complete it this way, you're paying a certain amount of tax, but there are exemptions that you could claim that save you that tax. So it's very much an order taking system rather than advisory based business. And we wanted to do something that was different, especially different for the Asia market, in that we actually advise clients how they should structure their affairs and what they can do to save tax, but not only to save tax, but to ensure that their assets are protected for future generations and that their affairs are structured in a way that works for them and their families. That's brilliant. And I mean, is it fair, or is it possible, probably a better way of putting it, to describe a typical client that you might look after? And do you have any examples of people that you've worked with so far since arriving in Singapore? Yes, without being, I guess, too specific. Without being too specific, absolutely. Yeah. So we typically work with clients that have some sort of UK hook. So that might be that they were previously domiciled in the UK, they've left the UK, and perhaps they're trying to establish whether they are still UK domiciled or not. There's a common misconception that just because you left the UK that you have no further tax liabilities there. That's not the case. It might be somebody that is looking to relocate to the UK, or an expat that's looking to repatriate to the UK, or it may be someone that just has assets in the UK, so thinking of purchasing property, or already has property in the UK. So we've done bits and pieces of work since we launched. Obviously, we're a very new business, but we have managed to save a significant amount of tax for one particular client who was returning to the UK just by negotiating where he was going to live on a temporary basis, so that he didn't have to pay income tax in the UK, which would have been substantial. And we've done that with very minimal inconvenience to him. I think he's probably quite happy about his current location. But just by going through his affairs and where he owns assets, we were able to save him a considerable amount of income tax in the UK. And I was obviously involved with that client, and it was a significant amount of money, and he's obviously delighted with the service that we provided him and the advice that we gave. Can we talk wills briefly? I know you have a constant bee in your bonnet about unregulated advice in this area, but it's obviously important. I believe you're working on a case at the moment where the guy, a very wealthy gentleman, only spent £95 on a will, and so far his legal fees are in the hundreds of thousands of pounds, or his family's legal fees, to effectively resolve the dispute between the family members. But talk to us about, or to the listeners, about the basics of wills and the things that you need to avoid and the things that you need to definitely do. Okay, yeah, so absolutely. So one of the issues that is constantly on our minds is that the wills market is unregulated, and so you are getting a will from a company and you don't necessarily know that what you're getting is fit for purpose. They may just be, again, an order taker, so you tell them what you want and they write it down, and that might not always be what you really want when it comes down to explaining the consequences of that and how you may be able to restructure it in a different way. My view is the advisory model is always the best way to proceed. I think a lot of people make an assumption that a will is a will is a will, so they are comparing on price, but what they're not actually looking at is the value that brings. So absolutely, that I have a case at the moment where I have been appointed as administrator. The individual didn't take appropriate advice. He got a will drawn up for very little, and at the moment about £300,000 worth of legal fees have been spent trying to fix the mess that had been created by that will writer. So whilst he might have thought he was getting a deal with his £95 will, actually it's probably a very, very expensive will. So when we're talking to clients, we try to educate them on the value that you place on that document. Arguably it's one of the most important documents that you can create during your lifetime. And so it's worth taking proper advice and getting something that's fit for purpose. Some of the common things that we see that go wrong is that you you make a will and you haven't given full information to the person writing your will. So your actual wishes may not be taken into account. We see a lot of problems with individuals with assets in multi-jurisdictions, because what tends to happen is they will be told, and in my opinion, rightfully, that you should make a will in every jurisdiction that you have assets. But then what's not happening is you don't have one person or organization that's tying up all of the wills together to make sure that they actually interlink and work together. So we ended up with a case very recently where a client had made a will and then he made another will in a different jurisdiction, and that second will actually revoked all of the other wills that he'd made in the other jurisdictions, and he hadn't realized. So what he was left with was only one document valid for a particular jurisdiction, and he was then left without any coverage in the other jurisdictions. That's very common. There are other issues with the taxation of different jurisdictions and how that may operate. There's also issues with trust. Some jurisdictions don't recognize trusts, or they recognize them to a limited extent. So what you don't want to do, for example, is be leaving some of your French assets into a trust structure, and you need to make sure that that's carved out. And if you are then in jurisdictions where there is an inheritance tax charge, like the UK, you need to make sure that the will is structured so that the exemptions are available. And it's not just enough to assume that they will be available, the will has to actually provide for that.
Again, that's very interesting. And I guess one of the things that maybe you've noticed since you've been in Singapore, potentially compared to the UK, is that often individuals' overall situation is a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more international. You've got various jurisdictions that need to be taken into consideration. Now, I know you're a member of the Society of Tax and Estate Planners and actually a former chairman of STEP in the UK. How do you manage, if you like, those complexities, the various international considerations, and do you utilise the network that is STEP to help with that?
Yes, so absolutely. You can't possibly be an expert on every single jurisdiction in the world. What you can do, and what we try to do, is to get a broad understanding of how different jurisdictions work and how they interact with each other. And we can do that by studying the double tax agreements that may be in place between the different jurisdictions, but also having a network of advisors that are tried and tested. So what we would never do to our clients is we wouldn't leave them in a situation where we say, right, you need a will in Hong Kong, off you go and find somebody. What we do is we have a network through STEP, and these are individuals that we know are experts in their fields, and we utilize them to be able to provide that service to the clients, but at the same time overseeing that so that everything pulls together and works to create the perfect solution.
Brilliant. Changing the subject slightly, but related, obviously, it's tax related and it's international. And very topical at the moment because of the Rishi Sunak and his wife's situation. But can we talk about Nondom status and how that might apply and work for individuals that are based here in Asia, particularly if they're planning to eventually move back to the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got two classes of non-UK domiciled, and one of the peculiarities about domicile in the UK, firstly, is the concept itself. Not a lot of jurisdictions actually use the domicile concept, but also it's not based on a specific rule. So you don't have like I mentioned previously, just because you've been out of the country for a vast amount of time doesn't mean that you are no longer UK domiciled. If it could be that you've been out of the country for 50 and 60 years, you could still be UK domiciled. But also, if you have ever been UK domiciled and then you return to the UK, even on a temporary basis, you become what we call an FDR, a formerly domiciled resident. And in terms of those individuals, there is scope for planning, but it's somewhat limited. However, if we are talking about people that have never been domiciled in the UK and that perhaps have had no link to the UK, and they are coming to the UK to live, what we can do is we can look at creating some sort of trust structure whereby the assets that they keep outside the UK are not going to be subject to inheritance tax in the UK at any point. And it's really important that if people are in that position, that they take advice early on, because once the assets have entered the UK, the planning opportunity is lost. And frequently we see this with sort of mixed domiciled spouses. So perhaps you've got somebody that's UK domiciled and they've left the UK and married abroad, and now they're thinking of coming back to the UK but bringing their spouse with them. There's quite a lot of opportunity for planning there, so it's something that should be considered.
Brilliant, Kelly, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with clients? So if you like the onboarding process, when you first sit down with a client, exactly what people in Singapore who would like to have a chat can expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would usually arrange an initial meeting where we'd have a conversation about who you are, what your assets look like, what your family circumstances look like, and what ultimately you are trying to achieve, what your priorities are. And in that process, we would be asking quite a lot of questions to really try and get under the bonnet of what your needs are, just so that we can see if we're able to help you and if we can work together. Provided that is the case and that we think we can provide some solutions, we would then provide you with a fee estimate for the work that we are going to undertake. Sometimes we can tell you straight away all of the things that you need. Other times we'll produce a report and we will undertake the work in stages. That gets sent to the individual. If they're happy to go ahead, then you will be contacted by my assistant, Zin, and she will take you through the onboarding process, which includes all the usual things in terms of money laundering and anti-money laundering, I should say, and the ID process. And then we would have another sit down and provide the start of the advice.
Brilliant. Just moving quickly on to trusts, because there's a deadline looming that listeners might not be aware of. Could you just briefly touch on that, and as a health warning apart from anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So worldwide, firstly, the governments have agreed to try to tackle fraud and tax evasion, and in doing so, there is going to be this automatic exchange of information. Well, that's already come into being. In order to be able to provide that automatic exchange of information, each jurisdiction has had to implement their own rules. In the UK, one of these rules is the trust register. So previously, there was no requirement to register a trust unless you actually had an income tax liability in that particular year, and for a few years after as a sort of runoff. Now, the situation in the UK is that all trusts have to be registered, and this catches people in situations that they perhaps might not expect. So we've got the trust that you might think of as trust, the family trust, but it also includes things like if you own UK property and it is in the names of one party, but actually it's owned by both. So very commonly you might have a husband and wife owning property and the property is only registered in one person's name. If your belief is that actually that belongs to both parties to the marriage, that's the registrable trust that has to be registered with the trust register. Now we have a deadline of September to get that registered, otherwise there will be penalties and ongoing fines. And then there is a period for all new trusts in which they have a period to register. But it's something that is really important and just must be complied with.
Now we've talked everything from tax, moving from Cornwall to Singapore, trusts, Nondom status, inheritance tax. If any of that is of interest or has raised a concern in the back of somebody's head with regards to this could apply to me, how do people get in touch?
So we have got our website, which is 8, as in the word 8, INT for international, taxandlegacy.asia. You can go to the website and you can find contact details there, which allows you to email or call us directly or go through our contact page. And also just going back to the wills part, there is actually a very nifty questionnaire on that site, which gives you, if you answer the questions, it'll give you an indication of the type of will that may be suitable for you.
Well, thank you very much. That was incredibly informative, and I think goes some way to prove that tax can be interesting. One fun fact about Kelly for the listeners is she actually learnt to drive a tractor before she learnt to drive a car. She is a proper girl from Cornwall, interviewed by a proper guy from Norfolk. So hopefully everybody's been able to understand our regional accents. Thanks very much for listening, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of these informative podcasts in the future. Goodbye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the British Chambers podcast. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, and why not leave us a rating and review on Spotify, Apple, Google, and the other podcast platforms. For more information, please visit our website at www.britcham.org.sg and tune in next time for a brand new episode.